earlier, Richard Daly is our president of the board at the Whale Museum, and he has helped make this happen tonight, so we thank Richard very much for that. But also appreciate him offering his talents to facilitate this this wonderful So I turn it over to Richard, and I think he's going to tell us the format.
Sure.
Some water? Does anybody need a beverage?
Yeah, you know what? Water's
I'll get some water.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'll be back.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Thanks for the introduction. But before we start, can we give these nice folks another round of applause? Thank you. And thank you, each and every one of you, for being here and the roles that you play. I'm sure this room, to a person, deeply appreciates everything that you've done and will continue to do. So what I'd like to do is just give a brief introduction to the speakers and ask them to individually give a little bit more about themselves, just a few sound bites, if you will. And then we'll turn it over to try to get the questions out from the audience. And what I will try to do is just sort of point to you and say, yeah, please. And then you can either ask a specific question from an individual or just say, this is for the panel. And we'll try to keep this moving along. And I think we have to be out of here by 4 in the morning. So, so we have a few people that are still hopefully going to join us, but we'll start over from your right. We'll start with Jeff Ventry, who you saw in the film, who is a former SeaWorld trainer and a physician in Ellensburg. And then next to him is John Jett, who's a professor of biology at Stenson University, and also, as you saw in the film. Naomi Rose, who is a marine mammal scientist at the Animal Welfare Institute and works with government policy. And then we have Steve Huxer, who you saw in the film as well, former director at Sealand in Victoria. And then we have Samantha Berg, who is also in the film. And Samantha she and her husband have an acupuncture clinic in Palmer, Alaska. And we have Howard Garrett, he and his wife Susan run the Orca Network, which hopefully we're all very familiar with and get very many emails from. That I have to interject personally. It's like, I love reading them, but then I just go, geez, I need to do something different. But anyways, it's a great communication. And then we also have Jordan Waltz, who is a researcher and film archivist on the film as well. So with that, I'd like to maybe start with Jeff, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a couple of thoughts, and then we'll walk down the aisle and then turn it over to
Can I just say real quick, let us know if you can't hear us, all right? So
yeah, there should
we
be
do have a mic, but I think we're not going to use it.
Are you okay in the back for hearing? Speak up. Speak up. So I think we're going to need to speak up a little bit.
Okay, I'll start off. My name is Jeff Ventry. I worked as a trainer at SeaWorld for 8 years, and then I went back to school and became a medical doctor. I now work as a physical medicine and rehabilitation physician in Central Washington, and have spent some time with Dr. Jett here. We have written 3 papers now and a chapter in a book that we're trying to use to kind of combine science with our experiences behind the scenes, to kind of shed more light on what's happening with captive animals, and happy to be here, so thanks y'all for coming out tonight.
Yeah. My name's John Jett, and before we start this evening, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and being with us and watching the movie, and for actually caring a little bit. It's interesting for me to be geographically speaking at the area where this all took place, right? In the 60s and 70s and 80s, and so I feel like we're probably preaching to the choir to some degree, but it's great to see everybody here. I live in Florida, so being on San Juan Island in the summer is terrific. So very glad to be here.
Absolutely.
In fact, if anybody has a job for me, let me know. I'm for hire. So.
I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and this is really very encouraging for me to see so much interest and so much enthusiasm and so much dedication to this issue, and to see the Blackfish effect really changing the dialogue, which 10 years ago wasn't at this level whatsoever. So I started with the Humane Society of the U.S., and I've moved to the Animal Welfare Institute, and this is the kind I like to speak to the people on the fence and also the other side. As some of you saw the debate that was held in San Diego, I really do thrive on that sort of confrontation. But it is equally inspiring to me to be talking to, preaching to the choir, as John just said. It's important for us to be energized and to be, rededicated to the issue. So thanks.
And again, I'm Steve. One clarification I always like to make is that there was a bit of an error in the film. I was not actually the director of Sealand of the Pacific. I was their head trainer and supervised their animal care, and also supervised the Victoria Marine Animal Rescue Center. The Blackfish effect has been monumental for me personally. After Sealand was closed, I pretty much hid myself away from the whole issue, put aside my love for Tillicum and the others, and just stayed very quiet for many years. But meeting Gabriella and just changed my life entirely. So I've now closed my business a year ago, and I'm working hard to being a writer and an advocate for animals, marine mammals, rodeos, whatever it might be. So that's what the Blackfish effect has been for me. It's dramatically changed my life and made me an advocate for animals' rights when I should have been many, many years ago.
And just so you guys know, if you want to read a great interview with Steve, it's on our website at Voice of the Orcas. It's a Google site, so just Google Voice of the Orcas, and you can hear his story about working with Tillicum. And if you cried at the end of this movie, you will definitely cry when you're reading that, when you hear about his experience working with Tillicum at the beginning. So it's definitely one that you want to read. So
It made me cry.
Yeah. My name's Sam, and I worked at SeaWorld from 1990 to 1993, so about 3.5 years at SeaWorld of Orlando. I got to work with these guys at the end of the table. You can see that's fortunate or misfortunate. We'll talk about that later. And one thing that I had an opportunity to do this year is I got to travel quite a bit with the film, and one of the big things was the film, and not many people in the U.S. are aware of this, but the film actually went all over Europe. And in fact, there was a representative from the Born Free Foundation in Europe who recognized the potential of this film to really unite NGOs, non-government organizations from all over Europe. And he managed to do that and get the film shown. We showed the film in 7 different countries, did 9 screenings, and then came back to Europe in March and actually showed it at both locations of the European Parliament, both in Brussels and in Strasbourg, France. And then after that, well, we actually spoke to the animal welfare working group in, was that Brussels or was that Strasbourg? Brussels. And then we also had a meeting with, I think it was 30 representatives and 16 different non-government organizations working on the anti-captivity issue in Europe. So as much as has happened in this country, the same effect has happened in Europe, and that's been really exciting to be part of. So I'm just, I'm really honored to be part of this. And last night we had Rachel Carberry, who's been organizing the Empty the Tanks movement. She did 2 tours basically in Taiji last year and the year before, and she did a slideshow from her presentation she did a slideshow about her experience at Taiji, and then she showed photos from all over the world of people who were participating in the Empty the Tanks movement, and they were just, the slides just kept going and going and going. I mean, people all over the world have had their eyes open to this issue because of Blackfish, so it was just amazing. And one woman in Mississippi with a single sign, that was the best part. It was just really incredible to see that, and the slides just did not stop for about 2 or 3 minutes, just placed all over the world. People are really been galvanized by this movie, so it's really an honor to be part of it.
What she said. I've been kicking around this neighborhood since the early 80s, so it's great to be here with the hometown crowd. This movie has just taken off. It's phenomenal, and I'm honored and very thankful to be with the caliber of the people that are involved in this movie, and I'm especially thankful to Gabriella Cowperthwaite. She didn't have to do this, and she didn't even know that she was going to do this. She thought she was going to do a kind of a simple documentary on one incident, what happened, how do you explain one death of one trainer. And once she looked into it, she realized, whoa, this is a really big story that will shake up the industry, and they will shake her up. And so she took that on, and with a lot of courage, she told the story absolutely truthfully as she found it. And I think she deserves a whole lot of credit for that. So, you know, it could be the Gabriella effect, you know. That's about all I have to say, but we welcome your input, so thanks for coming.
My name is Jordan Waltz, and I'm actually an artist from the Midwest. I've had a great affinity for marine life and nature for a very long time, but it wasn't until my late high school year I just started stumbling across very old articles about this captivity issue, and I just started hoarding all this information to myself. I didn't know what to do with it until I started getting contact with journalists, and I would start helping them out from there. And it was through the journalists that I got connected through Gabriella. And just seeing how this Blackfish effect is just going, it just changed everything, not just how everyone views captivity with marine mammals, but the ethics of zoos and how people view their food. I mean, it's incredible. And I'm very, very happy to see everybody here willing to come over here and just be very supportive of it. So that's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Jordan. I got to say one more. When I'm around people like this, I always think of the thing that when you know something and then you meet some people that know so much more, you feel so ignorant. And but it's so great that that you folks are here to share this. And I hope this Blackfish effect, that it affects so many people. I think there's a couple of lives and a couple of tanks that we really hope it affects as well, even more. So with that, who's the first to raise a hand here? Sir.
I'll break the ice.
Thank you.
We hear that there's one surviving whale from the Puget Sound group that's still in captivity, and that maybe she will be released in some form. Can somebody comment about this?
I think that would be for Howard.
Thank you for asking.
And can you hear me back?
You're right on all counts. She is still stranded and needs to be rescued. She's been in Miami it'll be 44 years in a month. And she's been doing the routine daily, faithfully, cooperatively, showing her courage and her patience. And I believe, and I can't prove this, her memory, her knowledge of where she came from, and that someday it'll be over and she'll be back and she'll be able to enjoy at least her home, and whether she can retie those bonds with her family, I cannot guarantee. That will be the big question scientifically and just in terms of legend. We'll see how that goes. The prospects are pretty good. I'm going to do a talk on this tomorrow night, but obviously have changed dramatically since this film came out and all the events that preceded and followed this film, which include a team of attorneys that have done just incredible work, long legal papers, and have managed to convince the National Marine Fisheries Service, I believe, it won't be finally determined until January next year, that she should be included as a member of her family, which is an endangered population, and therefore should not be held captive in a circus and used for revenue. So that holds a prospect that at least it will be the determination of the Fisheries Service rather than the owner. And there's a new owner that owns a whole lot of theme parks, and we don't know what they're thinking. But it'll be really up to the Fisheries Service to decide how to best treat a member of an endangered population. In concert with that is another suit which is winding its way through the courts and was appealed. The dismissal of it was appealed July 1. It'll be kicked to an appellate court now to decide if the violations of the Animal Welfare Act will warrant the refusal of a permit to the seaquarium to continue to display her. And those are that the space is too small, that she is solo and without companionship, and that she has no protection from the midday Miami sun. Those are only the three most egregious and most obvious, but there are multiple violations which altogether will help establish that she is not safe in Miami and that she would be much safer back here. So there's sort of this funnel effect where the choices for her future are being limited to returning to where she was born and raised. And, you know, look for some news early next year. And, you know, it won't happen immediately, obviously. But anyway, yeah, prospects are good. Thanks for asking.
So Howard, could you, is there a source or someplace somebody could Google to get more information on this?
Yes, well, Orca Network has a whole Lolita section. Yeah, so please go there. Yes.
Yeah, well, along that lines, I watched the movie Call of the Killer Whale by Jean-Michel Cousteau, and he chronicles the story of Keiko in that, as far as what happened with Keiko, and it seems like there can be the ideal of wanting to get these whales back into the wild, but then there's also the reality of what really happens, and
Right.
and so.
Can I repeat? I want to repeat the question,
Yeah.
if I could, and I will paraphrase. But
Okay.
the question is about the reference to a Cousteau film about Keiko, and the idea of reintroducing a whale back into the wild, and how viable is that? I guess would be the
Right.
Is that fair? Okay.
Right.
Well,
And so I guess what do you realistically expect or hope for?
right. Well, one size does not fit all.
Okay.
Keiko was one case, Lolita is a different case. Keiko was returned to his habitat, but not to his family. And there are other ways to take care of a whale, even if there isn't a reuniting with the family that, you know, could keep her here. I mean, I don't think she'll wander off across the Pacific, in other words, you know, because this is her home, and we'll see. I mean, it's just she is a different case. She's from right here, right around San Juan's, you know, captured off Whidbey Island. Yeah, it'll be different.
Can I add
Please.
something? It's a great question, and there's, you know, since the movie and probably well before the movie, there's been a lot of call, for example, to let's release Tilikum, right? But what the general public really doesn't know about captive cetaceans, killer whales specifically, Lolita is a really bright exception to this, but most killer whales, or many killer whales, I'd say, that are in captivity are very unhealthy. They are really burdened with a lot of chronic health issues, such as, which ends up being very, very important, broken down, ground down, missing and bored out teeth. As a result of this poor dentition, they have to receive antibiotics pretty routinely. Without antibiotics, they get systemic infections and die. And so the wholesale release of animals in tanks, killer whales in tanks who have been in captive environments for a long time, sounds like a really great plan, but just dumping them back in the ocean is probably not very feasible for many animals, for many killer whales in captivity. Yeah, there's variants of a release where maybe you can put them into a sea pen, you know, where it's cordoned off, and they can still receive some prophylactic care from trainers or handlers, such as antibiotics, antifungals, whatever. But they're burdened with some of these health problems that really kind of prevent many of them from being fully released, I think. That's my opinion. And I think it's an opinion that's shared by a lot of folks that kind of have worked with the animals. But Lolita, as it turns out, is a really interesting exception. She's got great teeth, and she seems really healthy. You know, of course, we're not there, and you know, the information that they dole out is controlled, so we're not really sure about Lolita, I think. But we do know from pictures that her teeth are really in great shape, which is, I think, an indication of her general health. So she may be one of those exceptions where she could be released successfully. So I think everybody's fingers are crossed for her.
Anyone else on the panel like to comment? Okay. Thank you both. Yes, sir.
It's not really a question, but it's two brief statements. 1975 in northern New Jersey, I worked for a place called Warner Brothers Jungle Habitat. It was run by Warner Brothers out of Los Angeles. They were so understaffed veterinary-wise, and even the vets they had there did not have experience with exotic animals. A lot of what went on there never made it out to the public until after the place closed. They would euthanize animals left and right and import new animals to replace them, and nobody was the wiser. When they finally closed, because it was not financially viable to keep it open anymore, the animals they couldn't place easily, and I say easily, in zoos around the world, they just euthanized. And there was a mass grave found years later out in the woods in northern New Jersey. My point is, if there's captive animals involved and money to be made, do not trust the source of those the captors, news-wise. Doesn't happen. The other thing I just want to tell you about, in California, they just had an expose about pig farmers and the treatment of pigs. And there's a Republican California congressman who's trying to get a bill passed that will state that if you go to work on any factory farm type situation in California and you fail to disclose any volunteer or paid association with an animal rights organization, you're breaking the law. So it's great to listen to this. I love Blackfish law, but it's up to us to become more enlightened in regards to, as this gentleman said earlier, all animals, and think about what you're eating and what goes into it.
I'd like to chime in one thing and just say that the energy that Blackfish has created needs to be converted into political action. And it doesn't matter what party you're affiliated with, the captivity issue seems to bridge the gap between both. And so I think it's really important to know where your political leaders stand on this issue, including factory farming and zoos and aquaria. And I think there is probably a difference between the two parties, but in general, I think progressive solutions need to be sought out, and I think it's an important thing to figure out. So, good comment. Thank you.
Yeah, Connie. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and I'm giving a presentation on Thursday evening that is going to discuss legislation and regulation related to captive orcas. So if you're interested in sort of how it works, how you can affect political change, because Jeff is completely right, we need to, the only way you're really going to affect these animals in the long term is by changing the laws. Sometimes you can persuade a company to do the right thing without the law being changed. But then all you've done is persuade that one company or that one person. The only way to make it certain that it won't happen again is to change the laws, which will affect everybody. So I'll discuss a little bit about that. I'll share with you some updates and so on Thursday evening. And I have no idea where that's going to happen. So
Yeah, and
I'll tweet something.
yeah, they don't know either. They're the ones organizing it.
Yeah,
so
we do
we'll
know.
figure it out.
yeah, and Sam had a comment.
Oh, I just wanted to mention along those lines, I just watched the movie Cowspiracy this afternoon. Jeff Ventry's sister, Kim Ventry, just had me watch it, and I really didn't realize, first of all, one of the animal issues out there, if you guys don't know, it's over 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions is actually not from what we think is carbon issues, it's actually animal agriculture. It's over 50%. And you probably also don't know, as animal activists are actually considered basically terrorists at this point. And there was an interview in that movie that was shocking to me. It was a gentleman who was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and apparently he had grown up on a cattle ranch, and he spoke out against cattle ranching and about the fact that this was unsustainable. He basically told the truth, and he knew that he was telling the truth, and he was sued by the cattle ranch industry, and he ended up winning after hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the statement that he made at the end was that that was the way the laws were before the Patriot Act. Now, post-Patriot Act, if he were to go on the Oprah Winfrey Show and say the same thing, knowing that he was telling the truth, because it might have a financial impact on the animal agriculture, all the corporations involved in animal agriculture, he would actually have lost. He would not have won his suit because of the way the laws have changed, and this is actually something that was directly written into the Patriot Act. So just to be aware that, and some of you guys have probably heard about ag-gag laws out there, it's really fascinating to me that if you are an animal rights activist, you are considered a terrorist in this country.
Number
Which
one
is frightening to me.
terrorist.
Number one, yeah, like
The
most
number one
watch.
domestic terrorist.
Yeah, and again, you know, along those lines, that nobody is, that a lot of the organizations that we think of who are speaking for the environment, even in an organization like Greenpeace, they don't bring up animal agriculture as being an issue in terms of what's contributing to greenhouse gases. So rather shocking to me, so thank you for pointing it out.
Very good. John?
What's the situation worldwide with any continued live captures of orcas, and is it continuing? Is there a market outside the U.S. for those? We think about this in terms of the U.S., but I keep thinking if you have an effect in the U.S., there's probably markets other places. So I'm ignorant of what the worldwide situation is.
So to repeat the question for those in the back, the question basically was about continued captivity around the globe.
Or captures.
Captures, yeah.
Very good question, and actually the action is not happening here, it's happening abroad. And it's rather grim, so this is not going to be one of my happy answers, and I'm sorry about that. The number one hotspot for the capture of orcas right now is in Russia, and that only happened recently. We really thought that we kind of licked the problem with wild orca captures because the last one that really occurred that was in any way successful, in other words, the animals didn't drop dead immediately, was in 1997. So we thought, well, you know, that was 17 years ago, and we've really kind of gotten this problem licked. And then last year, Russia just started the capture of these animals again. They've always had the capture of belugas. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the capture operations in Russia for beluga whales in the Sea of Okhotsk, but last year they started to capture orcas again. And then this year they caught more. So there have been 7. The number out there on the internet is 8, but it was actually 7. Killer whales have been caught in the wild in the Sea of Okhotsk in the last 2 years. Where the market is essentially domestic. So Russia has a plethora of horrible little facilities that wouldn't even qualify as roadside zoos in the United States, holding these animals, and they die. And that's why they continue to capture 20, on average, 20 belugas a year out of the Sea of Okhotsk. I mean, just think about how many facilities there are, double that number or triple that number. So there's a lot of facilities in the world, but not enough to take in 20 a year for the last 10 to 15 years. They're going places and dying and being replaced. All right, so in terms of the orcas, the main market is China. Belugas as well, but the belugas go kind of everywhere. They also go domestic. The orcas, 2 have been sent to China, and 2 from the Sea of Okhotsk have been sent to Moscow. The other 3 are still either in Vladivostok or dead. We don't really know. So that's the picture. What motivates the captures in Russia is money. They're only concerned about profit. If they have a market, they'll keep doing it. They don't care if it's sustainable. They don't care if it's humane. They're making a lot of money off of it, and that will continue to happen. There's a lot of corruption in Russia. It's a very difficult country to work in, and I don't have a lot of good news about Russia. The main market is China. I do have some good news about China. China is a communist country, which means its government is heavily centralized, and basically if the government says this shall no longer happen, it shall no longer happen. Pretty much just like that. And so we have some good contacts in the Chinese government. The Chinese Zoological Association is a quasi-governmental agency, which means that, again, if it says you won't do this anymore, then you won't do this anymore. But the problem is they don't actually directly regulate dolphinariums. Dolphinariums are part of China's flirtation with capitalism. So they're privately owned and run, which is a real problem. But we do have some hope that we can change the laws in China. If the laws change, then those private facilities will have to change. And they don't like looking like a third world country. Russia doesn't care, but China does. So when they look like they're behind the curve, right, you know, hey, the West is changing. They don't like dolphinariums anymore. They don't like capturing these animals from the wild anymore. And they look like they're 20 years ago. That'll influence them. That'll make them think. And so I'm working in both countries with colleagues on the ground there, and we'll see what we can do. I'm going to be in St. Petersburg in September to talk to scientists in Russia who are active with marine mammal research and see if I can't get them to speak to their authorities on behalf of the animals. So we'll do what we can.
I would just like to add to that, if I could, that the clientele, the customers for these places in Russia and China are, for the most part, the fairly relatively educated, middle to upper class, the people who consider themselves kind of, the intelligentsia, the people who have, feelers out on the world. They're watching the news. In other words, those walls, those curtains, can be permeated, and we can get the Blackfish effect through into even Russia and China. And what Naomi is saying is true. Their image is important, and if they see that this is actually not so popular here in the West, it'll start to diminish there. If they don't have their client base, they can't continue. So I think, it can be dealt with, but we've got to deliberately do it.
That's a good point. I mean, if we can close markets, it'll affect Russia. But I'm just saying, working in Russia to try to affect legal change is unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely too.
Yes, please.
Following along with that, Steve, I wanted to ask you what the current situation is with Vancouver Aquarium.
The question was, what is the current status of the Vancouver Aquarium?
This coming Saturday, the Vancouver Parks Board will be meeting with guest speakers. Wish that I could be there, but fortunately, I'll be here. So, to be honest with the Vancouver situation, I was very, very surprised. I thought that all these folks living in this setting virtually would have a lot more empathy, but I'm very surprised that the Vancouver Aquarium has a lot more support than I would have anticipated. In part just because, to some small degree, they are a more legitimate aquarium. They're certainly not a SeaWorld, that's for sure. But it's going to be a very close call. The Vancouver Parks Board could affect change because there are a lot of new people running, and they know that this is a popular issue, and they're also very aware of the Blackfish effect. So we'll know more by the end of the day Saturday, but right now it's about a 50-50 split as far as I can see.
Thanks. Yes, please.
Okay, well first, this is for John, Jeff, and Sam. I just wanted to say that I really admire you being a voice for this film, considering that you were part of the SeaWorld community. And then I wanted to just ask you guys, have you received some backlash from that community? And if so, how have you, I guess, handled it?
So the question was, if you don't mind me keep doing this, but I'm always sensitive to the ears in the back. The question was essentially, thank you for doing this and stepping up, but the concern was, is there backlash? Is that...
Well, thanks for the comment. This conversation actually began when Jeff and I started working together in the early 1990s. And, we had numerous conversations about all the bad stuff that was going down and all the bad stuff that we actually were participating in as trainers. And so fast forward to right when Don died, I made a phone call to Jeff and said, I think it's time to insert ourselves into the conversation. And we were really scared because nobody had really done that before. And so we were worried that SeaWorld was going to sue us. And I have a family, and my wife was against it. She was really very worried about, I don't think SeaWorld would sue us to win. They would sue us to drain our bank account. Opportunity for SeaWorld to go after us, and they didn't do it. And then the cat was out of the bag. And they were, within 6 months or a year, there was too many people involved, and so they couldn't go after us. And they really haven't. They haven't done much against me. I think they've sort of tried in their